This video is about how to apply skill and action in the classroom or to your yoga teaching or meditation teaching. And first, I'll share about my assumptions that I bring to the work, and these assumptions are really my philosophy as I do justice work and talk about the intersection of yoga and justice and changing the world. And so the first assumption I bring to this work of skill and action and radicalizing yoga practice spaces is about our culture. And when I think of culture, I think about the air we're breathing in, the water we're swimming in, the norms that surround us, the values and belief systems. And this assumption is focused on us living in a toxic culture. So the air we're breathing in, literally, is toxic, and the water that some people drink is harmful and toxic. So we live in this toxic culture, and we're not conditioned to see the toxicity or to understand what culture is made of. And we're instead conditioned to normalize things that are absurd, that are horrific, that are tragic. And this feels important with the yoga practice because so often we are encouraged to go inward without actually understanding the connection of our internal experience with the external world. So that's the first assumption. The second assumption is intent does not equal impact. I have very good intentions most of the time, and I cause harm just by being and by doing and sharing different identities in my body and not understanding everyone's belief systems or values. And so we need to focus on the impact of our actions less than the intentions around our actions. The third assumption is this work is not easy and we have to do it anyway. And when I say work, I mean the work of radicalizing our spiritual spaces. It's not easy to talk about what's going on in the world. It's not easy to talk about heartbreak or to connect with the heart and understand why it's broken. And we have to do this work anyway, because harm is happening, oppression is happening, abuse of power is happening, and it's hurting all of us. We must love ourselves into who we want to be. Compassion is part of this work of change, and it's certainly central when we think about spiritual practice and yoga. And so we need to have a critical analysis about what is happening around us in the external world. And we also need to have a compassionate heart as we do the work and work across lines of difference. And the last assumption is that we must believe in the possibility of creating the world in which we want to live, that we must walk our talk and learn from our mistakes. Yoga philosophy invites us into everything we need to know to create a just world. We must vision and believe that we can create the world in which we want to live, where everyone can be free and breathe and move freely. It's important to bring justice into the classroom, even though it's not easy. And in my experience, a lot of spiritual spaces or yoga spaces have difficulty talking about what's happening in the external world, and instead invite people into escaping from the external, which feels counter to the practice of yoga, because there really is no separation. If we do not talk about justice, we're doing a disservice to all of our students who are yearning for a deeper practice, a practice that is bigger than their own individual transformation. We're doing a disservice to all of the students who want to understand how to take their practice off of the mat, into their communities, and into the larger culture and world. And as teachers, we have the power to call people into a deeper practice. Take a moment to consider and notice what arises when you think about talking about politics, identity, and the cultural context in your yoga classroom or meditation space. Take a moment to notice any emotions that arise. Notice any discomfort as you think about bringing the political and cultural into the yoga space and into your teaching. Maybe fear arises, or the assumption that you'll lose students because they'll be upset about you talking about politics or the cultural climate. But just take a moment to notice what arises as you think about bringing the external into your internal classroom. What do you risk by not talking about the cultural climate, the external, the harm, and the heartbreak? What do you lose, and what do we risk when we don't talk about these issues? The reality is we are moving in this culture with different identities. We have privileged identities and identities that are oppressed by culture because of how power was constructed. And so every time you take your seat in the classroom as a teacher and you invite students into the classroom, you have a room of people that embody very different identities. Those dynamics are alive and at play even when you don't talk about them. It feels important and countercultural to dominant culture to actually uplift the identities and how we're navigating the culture and the world based on how power was constructed. When you do not talk about the issues of politics or of the cultural climate, you may be engaging in spiritual bypassing. And spiritual bypassing was a term that was coined by John Wellwood, who was a psychologist. And he was talking about spiritual bypassing in relationship to individual clients, not necessarily the collective or the culture. He defined spiritual bypassing as becoming addicted to spiritual practice as a way of avoiding the issues that we need to resolve. When I heard this definition, I thought about the culture, and I thought about all the ways in which we're taught to spiritually bypass in spiritual spaces. An example of spiritual bypassing in yoga spaces and meditation spaces is the use and overuse of the belief that we are one. We are one, it is a universal truth, but we're not able to live as one, and we're not encouraged to create conditions for everyone to live as one. We're also conditioned to think about sameness and see sameness without actually honoring the differences that we embody and how those differences shape how we can move through the world. Yoga is about something much bigger than transforming the body, practicing within the four corners of a mat, or taking a seat on a cushion. Yoga is really about non-harming. It's about truth-telling. It's about greedlessness. It's about devotion to something much bigger than us, than our own individual needs. And so when we show up to the mat or the cushion and we practice, that transformation is important. But when we practice absent of any awareness of what's going on outside of the room, we're engaging in spiritual bypassing. And yoga actually invites us into something much bigger.